Welcome to another episode of the Model A Mechanics Log. It's been quite a while since I've updated you on the car, and that's mostly because I've largely just been driving it around without doing any larger projects, because, to be honest, I was quite happy now just having a driving car after the whole crash debacle and the transmission crash and so on. Just drive it around and not do too much with it. And it's been doing that quite well. So, of course, there have been a few minor fixes and a few inspections I've done, and I just wanted to keep you updated on that. Let's jump right into it. Step one after the transmission incident was, of course, to get the car going again. So, once again, I had to pull the rear axle. I'm not even filming that anymore because it's just, a process which I don't want to get involved into anymore. Take the transmission back apart and rob the little bronze bushing out of the manipulated shaft I had in there and slap it into another shaft. I didn't buy a new shaft because I've heard all sorts of terrible stories with remanufactured transmission shafts either not being hardened and therefore, melting away like butter after a few thousand kilometers, and on the other hand, apparently shafts not being annealed after hardening and just causing a whole bunch of stress cracks in there, which I really didn't want to dive into, so for a much fairer price than a new one, I found me a new old stock unused one, which was made in Argentina. So I'm driving around bone stock with the transmission the way it is right now, except for that bronze bushing because my output shaft has been modified, as you saw in that transmission video before. In the meantime, I am of course still on track with upgrading my transmission. I think I found a way where I can go around all the stress crack issues that I've been fighting before and make it all out of one single strong piece. And currently I'm just waiting to get the shaft hardened and then ground, and then it's basically time to take everything back apart again, put the transmission back together with the tuning parts and see how that holds up. Once the car was driving again, I was of course immediately confronted with my friend number one in this car, which is noise. You know me, I've tried tons and tons of things to get this car quieter and I'm slowly giving up on it. However, I wanted to try one last thing regarding the exhaust. And that is, when you knock onto it, you can hear it ring like a resonance chamber. And I was figuring, well, if that rings around from sound waves traveling through it all the time, maybe I can just wind some insulation which I first thought I'd put inside and then forgot. Luckily, because you guys told me that would have been a bad idea with all the corrosive condensate gathering in that wool. Well, now I've wrapped it around the outside. It's just some heat-resistant wrapping material. And when you knock against it now, it's a lot more dampened. No more ringing. You don't notice that on the inside. The noise, which I could further confirm by hanging the entire exhaust from a rubber mount instead of mounting it directly to the frame. The noise is not coming from the exhaust. Despite it's now dead silent from the outside, the humming that you hear is basically just engine vibration traveling from the engine mounts into the frame and into the entire rest of the car, which is the nature of the beast. Because when you run any old four-cylinder engine, even a small one, at the RPM range that the Model A runs at, you're going to get that same frequency as well. It's the rattling when your standard car goes too slow in high gear. That's just normal, and I've come to basically accept it as inherent to the design of the engine by now. One rattling which I was able to fix, however, was the rubber mount where the push button for the electric starter goes through. The housing is riveted to the frame. I drilled those out, and then the rubber was non-existent basically because it was 90 years old and nobody ever bothered to change it. I have got one of these pop rivet guns, so I could just slap a new rubber in there, rivet it back, and it was done and fixed for good. Moving back to the exhaust, I thought that maybe through the reduced back pressure the engine would have to labor less in order to pump its own exhaust out and therefore maybe get more fuel efficient at high speeds. It didn't. Not one bit. Matter of fact, I used a little bit more fuel now than I did all the years prior, and I think I blame the carburetor for that. You know, I rebuilt an old carburetor and slapped it onto my engine, and I just kept it that way because it ran great. Matter of fact, it even runs better than before. And I'm willing to trade a little bit of fuel economy for that, because on the hills you notice that the top end is much later than usually. Before that I would top out at maybe 22 miles an hour in second gear, and then you would just notice the engine going and not being able to keep up with itself anymore. And now it just pulls right through. Und jetzt habe ich verloren. Scheiße.
Der Vergaser ist besser.
Matter of fact, looking at the spark plugs, you could see that before with the old carburetors they were pretty white, which means it's basically running too lean, and by now it's turned that slightly brownish color, so yeah, it's using a bit more fuel, so what? I consume about 13 to 14 liters per 100 kilometers, and the subtitle is going to figure that out in miles to the gallon for you. While we are at diagnostics, I also took the endoscope back out and put it into the engine. The engine looks great, really. I was worried after the engine rebuild that there were like scratching shapes in the cylinders. Well, they are still there obviously, but they haven't gotten worse. It's not really deep scratching, it's just, you know, polishing, because, well, piston rings do what piston rings do, and they slide up on there millions and trillions of times, so it's not a wonder that there is some traces of that in an engine as old as this one. The most important thing, as I said, it hasn't gotten worse, and therefore, you know, I just took a peek around there. It all looks fine. The valve seats look fine, nothing is burnt, nothing is heavily scored, there are no more swarf particles in the oil filter, absolutely none. So I'm calling the engine run-in and ready for the next couple of years, decades, whatever. While I had the camera out, I also dug it into the tank, because rust in the fuel tank is quite a common issue with cars of that time. They're not treated in any way, and many do that afterwards. I just wanted to take a look at things, and there was no rust to be found. I mean, minute bits here and there, but nothing critical. It was not like there was a whole pond of sand at the bottom. The tank looks fine. I'm really happy with that. However, when I took a peek into the differential, that all looked a little bit different.
Great. More junk.
There is no teeth missing, which is a good thing. However, the teeth themselves, they don't really look too good. They've got this shotgunning effect on them, just like my transmission had, and that explains the whine that I keep hearing from, shall we say, 25 miles an hour upwards. Nothing I'm going to do about it, really. I mean, it would make for a great video, but it would make for a great suffering as well. I've seen the videos where people take these apart and put shims in there and put it back together and then put bluing on the teeth and see how they mesh with each other. Take everything back apart, put a few more gaskets in here and a little fuel over here and so on and so forth. And I just don't want to get into that. As long as there is no teeth missing, I'm just going to keep driving it, because I think I'm just taking things a little bit too extreme with my standards here and there, and I've just discovered some things just don't need attention as immediately as I was thinking. Also taking a look at the prices for these things. I don't really want to spend that type of money right now, yet again. The magnet on the oil filler screw does a great job of keeping all the swarf out of the bearings, and so I'm just going to keep regularly changing the oil and leave it the way it is. Come on. I mean, my radiator has been leaking as well, and I didn't jump into action about it, and it fixed itself. So now I've got no more leaks. I will have to do it sometime because it's probably like a sieve, but just like the differential. I'm going to wait this time. I'm just going to wait.
Remember, fellers, great things happen when you cut corners.
It is currently February. On this northern hemisphere, that means it's winter. And after a fairly nice autumn, with some nice bits of touring that I did, visiting a friend and doing a little bit of automotive vacation, regaining trust in this car, now in the winter time, it's starting to get aggravating. The cold really isn't an issue. It's not like it phases me in any type not having a heater. The only thing that I do when it gets really, really cold is put a burner underneath the oil pan and preheat the car for like 5 minutes, because it really makes for easier starting when the oil isn't just some thick sort of honey. I'm driving winter oil, but it's just not enough for gravity feed. But also, the lighting situation is quite critical. You see, I've been talking about this mirror effect that the vertical windshield has and the vertical rear shield. That just means that when you're driving along the road and there is a guy in front of you, that gets reflected by the shield behind you, and that glass reflects it into the windshield in front of you. Then you mix that with a guy behind you and he's blinding you through the windshield as well. It's like a mirror cabinet, and it can be very irritating at times, especially when it starts raining, and not heavily raining, but just this sort of mist, maybe even just from a wet road, covering the windshield up. Then all these little rain droplets make for a gleaming windshield, and you're just flying blind and not really knowing where you're actually going, which is hugely dangerous. 2 things I can do with that, well, 3 things actually. Number 1 is close the curtain in the rear. That's a must in this sort of time. Then I've also put some tinted tape over the rearview mirror so it just doesn't laser out my retinas. And last not least, Rain-X. Put it onto the windshield, let it dry, and then wipe it off again. That keeps these sort of schleers from forming, and it still serves great in diverting the rain away from the windshield while you're driving. Because this little windshield wiper really doesn't do it. And it's really a shame. I have to be honest, ever since it's largely dark when I go to work and when I come back from work, I have stopped driving the car all that much, because, you know, the little idiosyncrasies with these cars and what you can call character, and the event of not having power steering and, you know, the manual feeling behind the car, that's just a totally different side than when it just gets outright dangerous due to these design flaws. It's, you know, it's all nice and fun and games when you're driving around during daytime, but during the night you just risk your life, and I'm not willing to do that. So you know, I'm not quite sure what to do about that yet, because I need a car year round, and for the moment I can rely on lending the car from my mother. I do a lot of cycling as well, but usually when it's, you know, cold and rainy, that's when you want to be inside a car, and when that's the weather where you can't drive a car, that's not really an option. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this little update on the car. It's driving around fine and it's not got any issues, and I'm still having all the projects in mind that I have started and that haven't yet been completed. I'm working on them, so just to let you know. And hope you enjoyed. See you guys next time. Bye bye!